we gather this evening to tell some of our stories, and in doing so, to remember. This is an important task. As this particular portion of our story begins, Jesus, an itinerant preacher from Galilee, and his band of revolutionaries have come to Jerusalem for the Passover festival. In his often cryptic way, Jesus instructs his followers to find a man carrying a jug of water and to follow him home. Once there, they are to tell the owner of the house that the rabbi wishes to use his upper room for the evening meal, and then they are to make preparations. At sundown, Jesus gathers this family for the Seder. As they are eating, he remarks, "Tonight, one of you is going to betray me." To a person, they protest, but he says, "Oh, my dear friends, it will be one of you." Then, according to custom, he takes the matzah and blesses it and passes it to them, saying, "Take some. I am sharing myself with you. Whenever you do this, remember me." And after he blesses the cup, they drink from it. And he tells them, "Every time you drink from this cup, remember the new way I have taught you." When they are finished, they sing a song and go out to the Mount of Olives. Tonight is the first night of Passover. All over the world, Jews are gathering for Seders. The Seder, if you're not familiar, is a meal celebrated by intergenerational families or communities in commemoration of the deliverance of the Jewish people from slavery in Egypt. This ritual ensures that the Exodus story of liberation is preserved for younger generations, and it also provides an opportunity to apply its lessons to today's challenges. There are a number of traditions included with the Seder, and of course they vary from community to community. These include a lot of praying, eating, storytelling, singing, and even a game of hide and seek. During the meal, the bittersweet nature of the story is symbolized by the eating of both bitter herbs and a sweet mixture made of fruit, nuts, and wine. Vegetables are dipped in salt water in remembrance of the tears of the enslaved. Matzah is eaten, rather than the traditional loaves of bread, as a reminder that when the ancestors fled Egypt, they had no time to wait for the yeast bread to rise, so they took with them just unleavened dough. During the ritual that accompanies the Seder, the youngest child asks the 4 questions of Passover, often in Hebrew, the answers to which, as explained by a leader, tell why this night is different from all other nights. A door is left open, and an extra wine glass called the Elijah cup is left filled on the Seder table. This is to honor the traditional belief that the prophet Elijah visits all Jewish homes during Passover to witness the celebration, and perhaps to usher in the messianic age of peace and freedom. This is what Jesus and his companions celebrated on that night we in our tradition refer to as the Last Supper, which of course is the basis for our celebration of communion. In pondering this story, I tried to think about the events from the perspective of Jesus. Remember me. My friends, This is not our first Seder together, but it will be our last. Do you understand that? Why is this night different from all other nights? Even as we recall the deliverance of our ancestors from slavery in Egypt, I prepare to be delivered into a bondage from which only death can offer redemption. And why? Will anyone even remember I was here? Why is this night different from all other nights? Tonight, I will ask of you a silent companionship, the ability to stay awake when everything you feel will compel you to hide, to sleep, run, to forget. You will fail, just as those who come after will find it hard to stay woke. I will love you still, though I do wish we could alter the finale. I just want to know it has all been worth it. To be remembered, is that wrong? Why is this night different from all other nights? I keep eyeing Elijah's cup and hoping against hope that the prophet will stop by this night to produce one more miracle. Usher in the kingdom of God. Take this cup from me. It is not to be. And I wonder, will anyone leave the door open, lay out a cup for me in years to come? I have my doubts. How is this night different from all other nights? My beloveds, I gaze at you and marvel at what we have become in so short a time. This motley band of dusty, bronze-skinned Palestinian peasants who have found in one another the courage to take on an empire without weapons. I hope you know how brave that is. And yet I know that one day we will be depicted as a pale people in pristine robes and sandals, sitting around this table uninspired as though we are discussing the weather. Halos of light will surround my head and maybe yours. Perhaps they will have come to believe that we are not human. They will be wrong. I do not feel courageous tonight. My pain is palpable. Fear consumes me. Will anyone remember that? How is this night different from all other nights? I would like to believe that when I am gone, my work will continue, that you will continue to heal the sick, tend to the vulnerable, liberate the poor, speak truth to power, serve feasts in the wilderness, tell the stories over and over, over and over. That what must be done will be carried on by those who follow. That when they see a people thirsting for freedom, they will remember me. That when names like Stefan Clark and Charlena Lyles are spoken, they will remember me. That when governments protect weapons instead of children, they will remember me. That when my name is spoken in defense of the indefensible, they will remember me. Me. But I know I expect too much from you and from them, just as perhaps I have from myself. How is this night different from all other nights? One day they will take my teachings and twist them into creeds, erect expensive edifices in my honor, and use them to serve other empires. This is not how I wish to be remembered. When I think of it, tears are insufficient. How is this night different from all other nights? Perhaps it is because what I command of you is simple. I have no right to expect your compliance, but I lack strength to face what is to come without this one hope that I will be remembered. So I ask you this. even in your running, your hiding, your fear, your desire to forget, you will have to stop to nourish your bodies as we have done this night. When you do so, remember me. When you drink, remember my tears. With the bitter herbs, our sorrow for the oppression of our people. With the sweet mixtures, our times with children, our love for one another, and our visions for what could be. Think of the time we fed the multitudes with a few loaves and fishes, and feast together, often. Invite a crowd, exclude no one. Know that I am at the table with you. Include me in the conversation. Listen for my voice. Breathe the same air I breathe, the breath of I am. Break bread and chew on the questions. Swallow your pride. Listen for the little truths. Sing, laugh. Tell our stories and your own. Cry. It's such a human thing to ask, I know. But please, remember me.
In remembrance
Our story continues. We find Jesus telling his followers, "You know, you will all desert me, as it's been foretold." Peter challenges him, saying, "Everyone else might desert you, my friend, but I won't." But Jesus says to him, "Peter, tonight before the rooster crows twice, you will have denied me 3 times. Still, Peter protests, saying, "Even if I have to die with you, I won't deny you." And the others echo his sentiments. Jesus leads them to the Garden of Gethsemane and asks them to sit vigil while he prays, letting them know that he is burdened with grief. As he prays, Jesus throws himself on the ground and pleads to be spared what he knows is coming. "Abba, Father, I know you can perform miracles. Won't you remove this cup from me?" But surrendering to what he knows he must face, he adds, "Your will, not mine." Taking a break, he finds that his friends have succumbed to sleep and wakes them, saying, "Couldn't you even stay awake with me for 1 hour?" But being who he is, he recognizes that while they have willing spirits, they are only human. So he returns to his solitary prayers. When he finds them sleeping a second and a third time, he finally exclaims, "Enough. Time's up. The betrayer is here. Let's move on." Then Judas, one of Jesus' close followers, arrives with an armed crowd of the powerful. And in accordance with their pre-planned signal, he identifies Jesus by walking up to him, saying, "Rabbi," and embracing him. This alerts the officials to arrest Jesus. One man in the crowd draws a sword and attacks a nearby slave. And Jesus cries out, "Why have you come after me with swords and clubs, when day after day you saw me preaching and could have arrested me quietly, but didn't?" Never mind. Let this play out the way it has been foretold. By this time, all of his friends have fled.
Perhaps it's just coincidence that the choir would sing when Jesus wept right before I got up to speak. You understand. You all know how I am about tears. It's been said that there isn't really a sermon until Tim cries. At our wedding, I realized after the fact that people were taking bets as to how soon I would start crying before I started talking, or after I started talking. The shortest time frame, that bet won. I've told many of you that this inclination to tears is not something I'm proud of. Whatever good effect it may have, it feels like a betrayal. My emotions overwhelming my sense of composure. And I've seen the ways that tears can be betrayal. Some of you remember those images of Jimmy Swaggart. Ever remember him? Right, sitting at the piano, crying up a storm because he had been caught, right, in an affair. I've seen those crocodile tears of feigned repentance betraying genuine regret. I've seen tears that attempted to manipulate people. I've seen the tears of those who thought that weeping was what was required of them in a time of sorrow, and so they are bound to put on a show. If I feel betrayed by tears, it is because I have lots of reasons not to trust them. But they come anyway. Unbidden, resisted, regretted. I have taken some comfort that the shortest verse in the Bible is John 11:35. You know what it is? Jesus wept. Or that Jesus wept over Jerusalem in those last days, or that he wept in the garden contemplating the end. I identify with Peter when he realizes that Jesus was right, and despite his best intentions, he denies Jesus 3 times, just as Jesus had said. Luke says that Peter went out and wept bitterly. I know that kind of weeping. There is in this story a connection between weeping and betrayal. If this Holy Week is about the story of Jesus as a window into our own humanity, I have to say that weeping and feeling betrayed by it is one of the quickest ways to get at what it means for me to be human. I want you to think I'm strong. I want you to think that I'm in control. I don't want to be swayed by emotions, and I don't intend to sway you by emotions. And I am all too aware of the connections, the gender connections, right, about crying. And yet, the tears come anyway. Like Peter, they come when I am doing the betraying. When I, through my actions or apathy, deny the truth of another person. They come when I am the one being betrayed, because someone is denying the truth of who I am. Although, honestly, I'm perfectly capable of betraying the truth about myself all by myself. I don't need any help. Like Judas, they come when I realize that my expectations have been betrayed. That's what Bart Ehrman says about one of the possible reasons Judas betrayed Jesus, that he thought something else would happen, that his hopes were dashed because things were not turning out like he expected. Maybe he turned on the one he had loved out of despair or anger or raw frustration, Ehrman says. How could he get it wrong? Didn't Jesus give every indication that he was the king they had been waiting for? And so the final deadly tears of Judas were the tears of someone who thought that Jesus was the one who had betrayed them, the one who betrayed all that they had hoped for. Or maybe it was just something that all went wrong. In a more sympathetic treatment of Judas, Ehrman says that perhaps Judas thought by having Jesus arrested, he would be protected from the growing hysteria of the crowd. Only to find out that his actions led to the violent death of his beloved one. And so he wept those inconsolable tears of good intentions gone horribly wrong. Or according to the Gnostic Gospel of Judas, Ehrman says, Judas was trying to save Jesus from his own body. He turned Jesus over to the authorities so that Jesus could be killed and escape the confines of his body. It was a liberating action. Except that we have been stuck with a body-denying spirituality that has a long and deadly history in the church. And in fact, in this section of Mark, as Cherry was saying, Jesus finds the disciples asleep while they're supposed to be praying with him, and he says, "Could you not keep awake 1 hour? Keep awake and pray that you may not come into the time of trial. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." How many times have I used that line on myself about the way my own body has betrayed me? The spirit is willing, but the flesh, oh, that nasty flesh, it's weak. I can tell you that the cancer diagnosis a couple years ago left me in tears, not because I was afraid, but because there was so much I wanted to do. I had so many expectations. I had waited so long for that sabbatical and finally finishing that doctoral program, and my body betrayed me. How could it? How dare it? And the tears came hot and heavy and hateful of my own skin. Do you know where I find some hope in this story from Mark 14? It comes in the very last verse in a very odd aside. The verse says, "A certain young man was following Jesus, wearing nothing but a linen cloth. They caught hold of him, but he left the linen cloth and ran off naked." Well, now that's an odd thing to throw into the story. But it does make me stop and think. Being naked is about being vulnerable, about being undefended, unmasked, present in our own skin. And I wonder if being vulnerable, undefended, unmasked, present in your own skin is exactly the thing that makes tears feel like a betrayal. We spend so much of our lives covering up. And then, like this young man, something strips away the cover of the things that really do betray us, like the denial of the truth about who we are, or the expectations that cut us off from the truth of others or from the world, or the denial of our own bodies, which we treat as something extraneous to who we are. What if tears are a way of being naked? And they feel like a betrayal because they uncover us. And so in this very human story, Jesus weeps, and Peter weeps, and Judas weeps in the uncovering of the truth about who they are. You remember way back in the beginning the story of Adam and Eve? The story that begins with them being created in the image of God and being naked in the garden. The story says they were naked and they were not ashamed. What if honest, genuine tears are a way of being naked? And therefore being ashamed of them is the biggest betrayal of all.
Ubi cari,
brought before a court of the elite and powerful. Testimony is brought against him as the council is threatened by his teachings and has been looking for an excuse to be rid of him. Many ask him questions about his miracles and beliefs, but ultimately they find very little worthy of condemnation, so the court tries to trick him. They are painfully aware that many among the poor and disenfranchised believe Jesus to be the long-awaited leader of a resistance movement that will overthrow those currently in power. So they ask him if these rumors are true by saying, "Are you the chosen one?" Jesus, who has been silent up to now, responds, "I am." Furious, they begin to beat him. Meanwhile, a servant of the court approaches Peter, who is outside in the courtyard, and says, "You were with Jesus, that man from Nazareth." But Peter shakes his head, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." Then he flees, just as the rooster is crowing. And the same servant following him says to some bystanders, "That man is one of them." Again, he denies it. Soon another addresses Peter, saying, "You dress like a Galilean, you must be one of them." But Peter curses and says, "I don't know the man you're talking about." Just then, the rooster crows a second time, and Peter recalls what Jesus said to him at the Seder and breaks down sobbing. In the morning, the council consults and decides to hand Jesus over to Pilate, the governor, who says, "I hear you're a king. Is this true?" Jesus responds calmly, "That's what you say." Then he is interrogated at length and accused of many things, but remains silent. As is customary during the Passover festival, Pilate plans to release one prisoner and asks the crowd if they want Jesus to be that one, since the case against him is relatively weak. But the people ask instead for Barabbas, a murderer who is also imprisoned. When Pilate asks what he should do with Jesus, they shout, "Crucify him," indicating a brutal but common form of capital punishment in the Roman Empire. He asks what evils Jesus has done to justify this, but the hysteria of the crowd increases, and the cries of "Crucify him" just get louder. So after flogging him, Pilate hands Jesus over for execution.
Justice? You think there's justice? Get real. There's no justice, not for Jesus or anyone else who speaks truth to power. Those who have power over others will hold on to their power regardless of the collateral damage they cause. Governments, with their heavy-handed political power, are often corrupt. Pilate found no fault with Jesus that called for death by crucifixion or death by any other means. But in order to keep the peace in the Roman Empire, Pilate freed Barabbas, a guilty prisoner, and condemned Jesus to death. So over 2,000 years ago, an innocent man was put to death. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Do we think governments can be trusted to care for the vulnerable, our children, the poor, the homeless, or the undocumented? Some would say money is the only thing that moves politicians. For in reality, the marginalized are condemned to the periphery. They must stay on the edge and look longingly at the privilege. That's the plan, you know. Those with special needs get inferior education. Those in ill health can't afford the medications they need to get well. And black and brown people keep getting killed by law enforcement when the only weapon they have is a cell phone. Justice? You think there's justice? There's no justice, only condemnation. One would hope that at least there'd be a modicum of justice and fair play in our religious communities. Our religious communities are to embody God's love, God's passion, God's compassion, God's mercy. But that was not the case with Jesus. You see, Jesus was a threat to the religious establishment. He called the religious leaders a brood of vipers. Jesus chastised the proud and arrogant and lifted up the sick and the youth and the poor. Jesus went into the temple and tossed out the money changers and said, "You have turned God's house of prayer into a den of thieves." Dr. Samuel B. McKinney, the pastor emeritus at Mount Zion Baptist Church, frequently said that Jesus was not crucified for saying, "Consider the lilies and how they grow," but was crucified for saying, "Consider the thieves and how they steal." Those in our religious communities, locally and nationally, struggle with what does the Lord require of us? But to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with God. What does that really mean? It's easier and more efficient to condemn and ostracize. That way, nothing needs to change. But to do the right thing may cost more money, may be more time-consuming, and call for more soul-searching. When religious communities opt to condemn, marginalize, and ostracize those who are considered outsiders, then those in power stay in power. And if being condemned by government officials and religious leaders is not bad enough, being abandoned by family and friends is the worst. It leaves us raw, vulnerable, and open. How do we survive when our road dogs or our ride-or-die girls or our besties turn on us? Abandoned and condemned? That was Jesus' lot on that Friday that we call good. All his disciples scattered. Judas betrayed him, and Peter denied him 3 times. Yet in those moments of excruciating doubt and pain, Jesus didn't deny his purpose. He didn't deny his mission, and he didn't deny his call. In those moments when it is just you and God, when it is just me and God, we still have to stand and trust God. Trust God even unto death. Following the way of Jesus, it will be rough at times. And we will be all alone at times. Our friends will desert us. Our blood family and our family of choice will turn their backs on us. But God's grace is sufficient. God will walk with us through the hardest of trials. God will walk with us through the valley of the shadow of death. And in our Good Friday moments, we must trust God until deliverance comes our way. And remember, with God, there is no condemnation. There is no condemnation with God. Only grace, love, and mercy. With God, there is no condemnation.
Our story continues. Early in the morning, the Roman soldiers lead Jesus into the palace yard, wrap him in a royal cloak, and press a crown of twisted thorns on his head. They make fun of him, spit at him, hit him, and mockingly bow to him. Then they strip him back down to his own ragged clothes, and in the early morning lead him out to be crucified. The soldiers force one in the crowd, a North African named Simon, to carry the heavy cross. They lead Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull, where they nail him to the cross and wait for him to die. On his left and right are crucified two convicted thieves. Passers-by, working one another up, shout insults at him throughout the process. There are those who mock him, saying things like, "Perform one of your famous miracles and come down from that cross." At noon, darkness comes over the land and lasts for 3 hours. In the mid-afternoon, Jesus cries out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Throughout this ordeal, many witnesses, including a number of women who have journeyed to Jerusalem, stand near the cross. Included with these are Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary, the mother of James the Younger, and Mary Magdalene, a friend of Jesus. Near the end, Jesus looks down and, seeing one of the disciples he refers to as my beloved one, and his mother standing together, he says to them, "Woman, this is your son," and to his beloved, "And this is your mother." From that moment, the disciple treats Mary as his family. Finally, unable to bear the torture further, Jesus cries out with a loud voice, "Abba, into your hands I commend my spirit." And with this, he draws his final breath.
Stories of Jesus' crucifixion and death vary among the Gospels. The Gospel, according to Mark, the first published, has the shortest version of the story. In Mark's version, Jesus cries out only once from the cross, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" My God, why have you forsaken me?" His friends ran away. He's alone, denied, forsaken. In Mark, a few women watch Jesus die, but they do it from a distance. Have you ever felt forsaken by your friends, by your family, by your God? Have you ever cried out, "Why have you abandoned me?" I have. I'm the youngest of 8 children, and my nearest sibling is almost 4 years older than me. When I was a child, we lived out in the country with no nearby neighbors, and by the time I was 12 years old, when I wasn't in school, I spent most of my time at home alone. My parents seemed old and tired. They both worked physical jobs for long hours, and most evenings after supper, they took to their easy chairs and read until they dozed off. Most of my siblings had already moved away from home, and my 2 brothers who still lived with us were rarely at home in the evening. Our house had a partially finished basement where we boys had our bedrooms. We also had a large open space that served as a rec room. That's where our black and white TV was, along with a couch that my dad built. And that's where I spent my evenings, alone, abandoned. One night, I watched part of a movie that was set in the Old South. I don't remember the name. I'm not very good at watching entire movies, let alone remembering their names. But I recall one scene. where the lead female character, a beautiful young woman, collapsed in the middle of a huge staircase and rolled to the bottom. Immediately, people rushed from every corner of the house to help her. Later that night, I sat at the top of the stairs to our basement, and I wondered, what would happen if I rolled down? Would Mom and Dad rush to help me? Would my brothers show up just in time? I didn't test them. I knew I was on my own, alone. That belief persisted through high school and college until I was 23 years old and working as a newspaper reporter in Walla Walla, Washington. During my senior year of college, I finally figured out my sexuality. And while living in Walla Walla, I wrote a letter to my parents telling them I was gay. I honestly believed I would never see them again. They had never cared about me before. Why would they bother to care now that they knew I was a homosexual? An abomination, in the words of their pastor. In my letter, I asked them to at least wait a few days and think it through before they answered me. My mom didn't wait. She shocked me. I had a letter back from her almost immediately, or as immediately as things were in those days of snail mail. I still remember one line: "You are our son." And that was that, as far as my parents were concerned. Some of my siblings shunned me for years and demanded that Mom and Dad do the same, but they refused. My mother became my friend and confidant in later years, and I was the son sitting by her side decades later when she died. I was so sure I had been abandoned, but I hadn't been. Was Jesus abandoned when he died on that cross? The Gospel of Luke has a slightly different version of the crucifixion scene. In Luke, Jesus comforts one of the men crucified next to him, and the last line he utters is, "Abba, into your hands I commit my spirit." And in the Gospel of John, Jesus interacts with those witnessing his death, including his mother Mary and his dearest disciple. Jesus says to them, "Dear woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." He dies after uttering a simple, "It is finished." Abandoned? According to some accounts, Jesus was definitely abandoned on the cross by his friends, his family, his God. But in other accounts, Jesus comforts a stranger, cares for his mother and a disciple, commends his spirit to Abba God, and dies saying, "It is finished." So how about us? I know what I now believe. We are not alone, my friends. Even when the pain is at its worst, when everything seems broken, when everyone else is either asleep or has gone away, when the powers that be condemn us, when we can't even stand to be with ourselves, let alone with anyone else, when all seems hopeless, when death seems to be all that remains, even then, we are not abandoned. We are not alone.
When evening comes, a man named Joseph from Arimathea, one of those who believes the kingdom of God is imminent, goes to Pilate and requests the body of Jesus. He wraps the body in linen and lays it in his family tomb, which is a cave hewn out of rock. Then he seals the entrance by rolling a stone against the darkened doorway.